Hi class, today's topic is going to be on relations and functions, specifically using interval notations to identify the domain and range. And so therefore your learning objective for today is to be able to differentiate between discrete and continuous functions and to identify their domains using interval notation. And the vocabulary words that we will use during this lesson will be discrete, continuous, and interval notation. So below we have two types of functions. The one on the left is called a discrete function because the dots are discrete or very specific values, whereas on the right we have a continuous function because the line consists of an infinite number of points. Now, to identify the domain and the range for a discrete function or a discrete relation, it will look as follows. So domain is going to be equal to, and then we're going to create this squiggly bracket. And if you take a look at all of the values along the x-axis, okay, since we're looking at the domain, we have the values -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So we're going to go ahead and write that in, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And that makes up our domain. And then for our range, we're going to look along the y-axis, and we see that the first point is at -2, then at -1, 0, 1, and 2. So we're going to go ahead and write that in and start with an open squiggly bracket, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, now notice that I'm writing these values in integer order from least to greatest. Same here with the range. Okay. Now with the continuous function on the right here, okay, we're going to do something similar, and we're going to say that the domain is going to equal, now take a look, if we look at the x-axis, okay, we see that this function, or this line, continues down, or to the left in this case, into infinity, or what we call it negative infinity, because it doesn't stop. So then my domain is going to go from, and we're going to start with an open parenthesis, and then negative, and then the sideways 8 is an infinity sign. Here we're going to start with this left segment, okay, and we see that it starts with a discrete value, okay, and then it ends with a discrete value, okay. So to specify the domain for this, it would look as follows. My domain is equal to, okay, with a discrete value, we're going to start with an open bracket, okay, and in looking at along the x-axis, we see that it starts at -1, -2, -3, -4, okay, so it goes from -4 and it ends at 0, okay, and since this is a discrete value, we're going to close that off with a bracket. Okay, and now the range, we're going to look along the y-axis. It starts at 0 and it goes all the way up to 4. Okay, so then we'd write open bracket, 0 to 4, close bracket. Okay, Now we're going to look on this side. You notice the segment has a discrete value, starts with a discrete value, but then it ends with an open discrete value, okay? And so the way we're going to express that is a little bit differently. So let's start with the domain again. The domain is going to be equal to, okay, we're going to start with the lowest value that's along the axis, gives us a value of 1. So we're going to say open bracket 1, comma, and then it goes all the way up to 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we're going to write the value of 4, but instead of closing it with a bracket, we're going to close it off with a parenthesis. What this tells us is that the endpoint ends at 4, but not including 4. So it includes every value from 1 all the way to 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and every infinite point in between, but it does not include the number 4. And we represent that by closing this off with a parenthesis. Okay, and then the range will be equal to the lowest value here along the y-axis would be 1, and it goes all the way up to, but not including 4. Okay, so then we would specify that with an open bracket at 1, and then it goes all the way up to 4, but not including 4. So we close that off with a parenthesis. All right, let's move on to another example. Okay, so with this example, we see that it starts with a closed discrete value, okay, and it ends with an open discrete value. Okay, so then to specify the domain in interval notation, we're going to say that the domain is equal to, now we're going to look at it from the perspective of the x-axis. Okay, the leftmost point is right here, and that's negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we're going to open that up with an open bracket, negative 6, and it goes all the way to over here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, but that's an open circle, so we're going to write 6, but then we're going to close that off with a parentheses, which specifies that it's open at number 6. Okay, and then the range will be, okay, so we're going to look along the y-axis. What is the lowest value here? Well, it's this open circle, so it's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. Okay, and since it's an open circle, we're going to open it up with an open parentheses, specify that it starts at negative 3, and it goes all the way up to the highest point is right here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we'll say 5 here. And since this point right here is a solid point, okay, it's not an open circle, we can close that off with a bracket. Okay, and let's look at one last example. Okay, here we have one that starts with an open circle and extending out into infinity to the right. So let's go ahead and identify the domain in interval notation. So the domain is going to equal, okay, now we're going to look along the x-axis perspective, and it's the leftmost point is negative 2. Okay, so we're going to open it up with an open parenthesis because the negative 2 is an open circle. So we're going to write negative 2, and it goes all the way to the right, and it never stops, so it goes into infinity. So we're going to write the infinity sign. Okay, and then the rule with infinity is that it goes with the parenthesis. So we're going to close that off with a closed parenthesis. And then now we're going to look at the range. And the range goes from, what's the lowest point? Well, it's right here. 1, 2, 3, right? And that happens to be the highest point. So my range is as follows. we're going to use that squiggly line and write 3, and then close it off with a squiggly line. And what that means is that the range is only 3. Okay, there's no interval involved here. Okay, so we're going to use a squiggly bracket. Okay, let's go ahead and summarize because we went through a lot of different notations. So we're going to use brackets to specify